early in 1987. That's when I first was introduced to the concept of the ball scene, or even families being on the scene, meaning gay families. And that was done by this guy named Avery. He was part of this group they used to call the Bone Crushers. But he sort of adopted me as his gay child on the scene, and sort of made sure that, nothing happened to me and I didn't get caught up in a whole lot of madness. Wow. But weeks after that, I was also about to graduate from high school and on my way to the military. And that's what my life was, in and out of the ball scene, going back and forth for military training during the summertime and long tours, to Iraq during the earlier phases of Desert Shield. But eventually I would come back home. And in 1992, that's when one of my friends by the name of Tyrone, he was from this house called the House of Avant-Garde. That was one of the original houses here in Chicago. So he began to explain to me about these groups called houses, and I was like, are you talking about families? He said, no, houses, where there's voguing, there's dancing, and things like that. So once he introduced it to me, I said, okay. Then all of a sudden he introduced me to two other people. Another guy by the name of Aaron Enigma, the father of Enigma. He's also one of the regional icons, and a guy by the name of Wayne Pink. Now, he was in the House of Elon at the time, so they tried to recruit me because, of course, back in the days, I was quite sickening. He was sort of sickening now. So they wanted me in the house, to walk models' bodies in their houses. And at that time, it was the House of Elon, the House of Avant-Garde, and the House of Enigma. But since there weren't a whole lot of houses in the region, that is when Andromeda was born. I said, well, why don't I start my own house? And I said, I'll call it the House of Andromeda.
All right.
I chose the House of Andromeda because Andromeda was sort of like, everybody else had a name that was copied off something else, or perfume, colognes, or things like that. Because what ended up happening, that's when I ended up seeing the movie Paris is Burning around that time. And I noticed a lot of those names were made-up names off of colognes and things. So I said, well, I'll create a unique name. And that's when Andromeda came about.
Wow.
Well, in 1993, after formally establishing my house, because of course the rule was, in the Midwest, if you wanted to open a house, you had to have at least 2 children in your house, and you had to exist for at least a whole year in order for them to recognize you as being a house. And so once Andromeda was formally established in 1993, which would have made up the year, I then took a trip to Denver, Colorado, where when I was out there in the military, I was in this dance group called the Juka Boys.
All right.
And
yes.
I changed the name of the Juka Boys house to House of Andromeda, chapter number 2. After helping them get established with the mother out there by the name of Mitchell Andromeda, I decided to come back to Chicago. Well, I was back in Chicago in 1994, and being full-fledged on the scene as Andromeda, going to different balls, different functions, learning pretty much all of the rules of the games. But the longer I learned the rules of the games, I discovered that the rules of the games only applied to those people who were that were within that know, because there had always been competition within this region. So my little house, Andromeda, as she was known, had always been the outside of house, outside of what I call the colossal houses that started the region in the beginning.
Wow.
And that was the House of Avant-Garde, which was if anyone should have the reigning title of forging the whole Midwest, it's Wardell Avant-Garde, icon Wardell Avant-Garde. He was the first to bring to the Midwest the whole concept of the ball community.
Wow.
But a year later, there was another house that was called the House of I mean, those were the two competing houses in the Midwest at that time, from 88 to from 86 to 89. Those were the two competing houses. But out of those two houses alone were born other houses. From Avant-Garde, you had the House of Enigma by Aaron, the House of Elon by Kenny. You had the House of Odin by Roderick and Roman, the House of Fermont, the House of Montgomery, and even the House of Milan. Those all came out of that one house, the House of Avant-Garde.
Wow,
But
amazing.
then you had the House of Amin, which you had the House of Nefertiti came from that house. In 1989, the House of Fendi. From 90, the House of Excel. 1991, that house was started by Midwest pioneer Mark and Percy. Percy now is in the House of Omni, of course.
Percy Omni. Shout out to Percy Omni.
And then you have the House of Fantasy, which was started by a child by the name of Trinity. And then Percy also turned around and started another house, the House of Amiro, I think it was Amiro or something like that, in 92. But again, during that time period, you also had, the Midwest had to deal with the fact that the East Coast really didn't recognize or even see us as being a ball region. So for the most part, we were sort of like an island in the middle of an ocean, and we were getting lucky if someone even reached out to tell us anything about how this concept of the ball scene is supposed to go. Eventually, in 2000, as the years went on, we finally, shined a light bright enough that eventually we started to attract different houses from the East Coast, and that includes the House of Omni, the House of Mugler, the House of Mizrahi. All of those houses started to come in the early in early 1995, because there was a real big ball here that Kevin came to. And when all of them started seeing that the Midwest really did have a ball region, that's when everything started to pick up.
Wow.
But along with picking up the recognition, the region started to pick up a lot of the bad habits as well. As time went on, for Andromeda, we actually only had two balls within our lifetime. Mm-hmm. And one was called the Thunderdome, and that was in 1995 at this place called Ann Sanders. And again, this was a process where when we were having balls, no one ever told us, look, you guys need to record this. No one ever told us any of that.
Wow.
And that's for the most part, we were having our functions at clubs. They weren't at spaces. So we had balls at, this place called the Clubhouse, the Generator, a club by the name of the Rear, the places like that, the Dark Side, the Dark Side was the start. And originally when I tell you, its name matches exactly how dark it was in there. But it was the funnest place out of all of the places that we had. And it was back in the day when going to functions were actually fun.
Right.
But as time went on, and the ball scene, everyone started, reaching towards the glory of status, then that is when we started getting a whole lot of the problems, and people started losing sight of the original concepts of what families in the ball scene was all about.
Right.
For me and my house was always about trying to reach out and help ball kids who, during the process, they were being put out in the streets in the early 90s, because, that's when the HIV epidemic really took a blast to the scene, and a lot of the kids were just blatantly being blamed that if you're gay, you must have HIV. So a lot of their parents were kicking them out in the streets, and that's when the houses became very important, because not only were we providing, food, water, and shelter, for a lot of people, we were also saving these kids from the streets.
Wow, amazing.
Eventually, there was a period in Chicago, in the Midwest, really, because Chicago is sort of it's the cradle of the Midwest. The Midwest consisting of Minnesota, Milwaukee, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, all these states within the Midwest. Milwaukee had just been added last year to the region.
Wow.
But Chicago being the cradle and then everything branching out towards Wisconsin and Indianapolis, this is where it actually all got started at. But this is also where a lot of the unnecessary drama got started as well.
Wow.
But eventually there was a period within the Midwest region in which it's what I call the time of the empty throne. It's a time in which a lot of the original founders of the different houses had all but disappeared. But the ball scene still prospered because all of the children that were coming up, they also learned a few things as to how to keep things, rolling along. And out of those different houses that kept things rolling along, that included houses like the House of Infinity, the House of Escada, Herrera, Gotti, Ibiza, Chanel, Milan, Balenciaga, and that's just to name a few of the houses that kept the ball rolling because, again, nobody knew what had happened to a lot of the original starters of houses. It's not that we were gone. We were still here. It's just that we discovered we needed to take on an additional role because as a lot of people have, voiced their opinions about the depiction of what balls are all about or what the family and ball community is about based on what they've seen in, the documentary by Jenny Livingston. That right there made a lot of people in this region say, well, you know what, we have to do something different because that's not what the ball scene is all about. It's not all about having kids going off the stores, stealing, robbing, and selling their body and doing all those things. So for me, I ended up being a manager at a restaurant, one of the favorite, it's an East Coast restaurant as well, it's called Checkers. You all may know it as Rowley's.
Wow.
And being that I was one of the managers there and eventually became a district ruler, and mind you, I'm still in the military, but on reserve duty now. So I'm triple duty here.
Yes, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. And what I decided to do, I said, you know what? The ball scene, for my kids, it has always been, the ball scene is entertainment. If any child decided they want to get caught up in the ball scene and they didn't want to listen any longer, all me and the original house mother, her name was Simone Andromeda, we would ask that you have enough honor to come and tell us and let us know that you want to move on, that we're no longer providing you the life that you think you're going to get in the ball community, and you go in peace. And we've had kids come into the house, stay, discover it was too boring for them because in the Midwest, we were like the virgin house. We were the house that nobody didn't do drugs, nobody was doing alcohol, nobody was even going to all of the underground sex parties that were occurring all over the place. So we really didn't fit in, and the whole community knew that.
Wow.
And that also became part of what I call the pariahism of why we couldn't fit into some of the different events that occur, because I was always looked at as, well, that's Gentry-Andromeda. He's the goody two-shoes. But it wasn't really like that. My goal was just to give kids an additional option to do something else with their life, because that's what the whole concept of the houses were supposed to be. Right. It was sort of, contradictory to accept a child into your house who just came, possibly with some family within their real families, and then you turn around and bring them into dysfunction. That's not serving that individual, and that's the type of stuff that I didn't want in my house. So,
good for you.
Getting back to Checkers, what I decided to do is, at Checkers at the time, and this is 94, 95, we couldn't hire anyone that was under the age of 17. Now, you know,